Okay, hi. So I just wanted to ask you before we start the interview, like, what do you know about our Just Teen Stress project?
So I've had a little look and watched some of the YouTube videos, and it seems like you're trying to sort of raise awareness about stress in teens, like reduce the stigma a little bit. Seems like you're interviewing people like me, therapists or professionals who work with stress, and also people who are teens experiencing stress.
So basically, we are a mental health initiative started by some high school teen girls in order to address teen stress, which is a topic that doesn't get talked about a lot. So there are different kinds of series, such as Beyond the Brain, where individuals like you are featured in, and we speak to like therapists and kind of get a broader sense of what mental health is among the youth community. So yeah. And
Yeah, it sounds really cool.
I'm Abba, one of the co-founders of Adjusting Stress.
Hi, Albert.
And I'm Vedika, also one of
Hi,
the
Ved.
co-founders.
Ah, cool. Hi, Vedika.
Okay, so would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Lisa. I'm a behavioural and cognitive psychotherapist, specialising in cognitive behaviour therapy, but then sort of more went into acceptance and commitment therapy. Been doing it for like getting on for 9, maybe 10 years now. Um, I I really love it. It can be a very stressful job, but yeah, it's great.
So I know that you started an Instagram page called @grove.mind, which is how I reached out to you and found out about your platform. So what's the purpose of that and how has that impacted you and others?
Yeah, so I think mental health support is just quite hard to come by. It's either very expensive, or at least in the UK anyway, you can get therapy on the NHS, but there are quite long waiting lists. So I just wanted to have a space where I could try and provide sort of more free support. Obviously, I can't provide therapy through there, but like we can definitely provide psychoeducation, tips, insights, things like that. So again, similar to you, like raising awareness, reducing stigma, just providing some sort of value, some things that people can get started with. And also, personally, for me, it's just a bit of a challenge, and like you get a little bit more creativity there, whereas I don't get that so much in my day-to-day job. So yeah,
And what
and
got
eventually, I might start private work, so I might start offering
oh,
one-to-one sessions and things. But
that's cool. So what got you into therapy?
um well, lots of things really. But when I was a teenager, I went through some a really difficult time. A family member had an accident and they became quite disabled, and it changed sort of our family's lives. And sort of from then on, like I just knew that I wanted to help people. I knew I sort of wanted to give back. So yeah, I just sort of going through a lot myself. And I think that's how a lot of mental health therapists get into it as well, because you experience it yourself. But also I just had this fascination with like the brain and the mind and like how it all works and stuff. So that's when I ended up going to uni to do psychology. So yeah.
And from being a teen to now an adult, how do you think your perspective of mental health and of therapy has changed over time?
I think I'm definitely more open to, well, I'm definitely more open to therapy now. I think when I was a teenager, it was much more stigmatized and much more like a taboo subject, whereas it's still not there yet. It's still quite stigmatized, and people still scared to talk about it sometimes, but it's getting better, and especially with organizations like yourself, it's brilliant. But yeah, and my perspective on my own mental health, I think you just grow a lot, but also like I've done a lot of work on myself, and obviously I've got the added advantage of being a therapist and having the training, so I sort of have that little bit extra knowledge. I love reading like self-development books, and just working and trying to grow myself. But yeah, the pressures from going from a teen to an adult, they're different, but there's still a lot that I think is similar, in some senses, like the pressure from society, pressure from jobs, pressure from peers, and things like that. So it changes, but there's some threads that are the same, I think.
So can you explain how does stress affect a teenager's body?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first and foremost, stress isn't a bad thing. Like, it's part of being a well-rounded, healthy human to experience a full range of emotions. And when we go into the stress response, it's a sort of a survival mechanism. It's there to try and protect us. Our body thinks something's wrong, so it's sort of fighting for our survival, which just isn't harmful in the short term. There's nothing to sort of be worried about. It's just then if it becomes sort of chronic, long term, if it's getting days to weeks to months to years, that it can become a problem. There's adrenaline and cortisol pumping around your body, increases your blood pressure. It can lower your immune system over time, so it's fine in short term. In fact, it's very healthy in the short term, but it's when it's the longer term that it can have a huge impact. Irritability, tiredness, mood and anxiety disorders, it can become quite problematic, I think.
So how do you deal with stress now compared to how you used to as a teenager?
Well, I've got a lot more tools at my disposal, for a start, and I love using ACT therapy as well. So I'm all for feeling my feelings. So rather than running from stress, I tend to walk towards it now, if that makes sense. So when I feel stress in my body, I approach it. I sort of notice what's showing up for me. I make room for it and I allow it to be there, rather than when I was younger, I would try and fight it and I didn't like it, just couldn't allow it to be there. Often that resulted in drinking too much. And I used sort of those ways of coping when I was a teenager and younger. I think that can also be quite a common thing in chronic stress and anxiety as well. Drug and alcohol addiction. But yeah, so I'm definitely more open to feeling my feelings and have a lot more tools at my disposal now.
And then you mentioned that you used to run away from your problems, and that's something that I repeatedly have seen, like from interviewing teens and even therapists. That's a common issue within like the youth community. So why do you think that is?
I think because it's painful. I I don't think we're taught from a young age. I don't think it's any particular parenting fault. I think it's a society thing, and not just particular to one country. I know from being from the UK, there's something called the stiff upper lip, which means that we sort of try not to show our emotions. But I think there's themes of that in across the world and in all cultures. So I just don't think emotions are talked about enough and demonstrated from like parent to child as well. I think that's changing now, and I think we're really starting to break these generational traumas, and people are really doing some good work on that. But yeah, I think society sort of, it's almost like today's modern world doesn't have time for emotions. It's like, no, don't, don't. But it's so important. If we don't process and feel our emotions, they're just going to manifest in other ways ultimately.
And do you believe that a child's like cultural background and the way they're raised, whether it's like their lifestyle with their parents, do you think that plays an impact on their mental health and specifically on their stress levels?
Yeah, it's a really tricky question, and it's something I remember doing way back in like A-level psychology, this whole nature nurture debate. I ultimately don't think that anyone's ever found an answer for that. It's just a bit of both. It's it can be, like I say, generational trauma. It can be stresses when we're young, but there is some evidence to say that yeah, if we experience stress when we're younger, we are more likely to be sensitive to stress in our teen and adulthood years. So yeah, I think it's a combination of things. It's tough to pinpoint.
And then on your resume, when I was like looking at it, it said that you were certified as a CBT and a ACT. Is that correct? So what is the
Yeah,
difference between the two, and can you elaborate on your experience with both?
yeah, absolutely. So CBT is, if you imagine, one of my lecturers used to explain it like this: CBT is like the tree, and the ACT is like the apple. So it can be quite hard to compare like the apple to the tree, if you like. ACT sort of grew from CBT. It's still a behavioural and cognitive psychotherapy, if that makes sense, but there are some differences. CBT has been around for a lot longer, so it's got a lot more evidence base, although ACT is now catching up. ACT is more about, so rather than challenging the content of the thoughts, which we would do in traditional CBT, so say I had the thought, I'm not good enough. In traditional CBT, it'd be like, well, let's look at the evidence for and against this. Let's try and find some reasons why you are good enough. And not necessarily about positive thinking, but a bit more balanced. So maybe there's some things that you're not good enough at, and maybe there are some things that you are. Whereas in CBT, whereas in ACT, sorry, we don't try and challenge the content of the thought. We just try and change our relationship with them. So I can be sat here thinking that I'm not good enough, but I don't have to let that thought take over. I don't have to let that thought dictate my behavior and what I do. So I can allow that thought to be there, but I'm not going to give it my time, my attention. So it's more about learning to live with those thoughts rather than change them. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the main differences. But yeah, ACT is also very much values mindfulness based, and there is that in CBT, but I think there's just more evidence, more prevalence of that in ACT.
So what's the number one issue that you've helped or like treated or like improved among your clients?
That's a really tricky question. Tend to work with such a variety, but as you can see from my Instagram page as well, I do quite like working with generalized anxiety disorder, or what we call worry, which again is so closely related to stress. So it's often people with high functioning anxiety, people who are more overproductive. Yeah, I find that we can do a lot of work with that. There's a lot of stuff that we can sort of progress with and things, but there's, you know, there's really good outcomes for things like OCD, panic. I love working with phobias as well. There's, you know, there's lots of great things out there and lots of different therapy types as well to do it with, if CBT or ACT isn't one of the ones that fits with you.
What are some tips do you have for teens struggling with stress and struggling with anxiety problems?
So first of all, I always say notice and name what you're experiencing. So it's all about connecting with your body in the here and now. We often forget our body when we're talking about mental health. It's all up here and in our thinking. It's really important to include our body in what's showing up as well. So trying to just notice and name your emotions is a good start. Along with that comes feeling your feelings. So I talked a little bit about that earlier. So it's just about having those feelings. The trouble is, when we're stressed, if we are fearful of that stress and we don't want that stress, what happens is that our brain sets off an alarm. It's like, oh, stress, I don't like stress. It starts seeing stress itself as a threat, which we know it's not in short bursts. And it can become this vicious cycle. So it's about recognizing when you're feeling stressed, allowing that to be there, and then taking steps to try and look after yourself. And that's probably another tip I give as well, is look after yourself, meet your needs, like do what you need to do. I just don't think that's taught very well in our society, in schools, in general, like culture. It's almost like self-care is selfish, and I really want to try and bust that myth, because it's so not true. Self-care is essential, and we need to really work on looking after ourselves and meeting our needs. So yeah. But yeah, I could probably go on, and there's lots more tips on Grove Mind as well if you want to check them out.
And like the stress topic in general, I feel like stress is something that all of us deal with at some point of our lives, whether if it's academically or social. It's just a general thing that we all deal with. And so, what do you think are your coping mechanisms in order to reduce your stress?
Lots of things. Where do I start? So mindfulness is probably a big one for me as well. So getting present in the moment. I use that to reduce my stress. Exercise as well, like I'm not massively fit, but I love going on hikes and walks and doing a bit of yoga sometimes. Like I say, that mind-body connection is really important. Again, all the stuff I've talked about, feeling your feelings, and what I was saying a little bit earlier about thoughts, like either challenging my thoughts or trying to watch my thoughts and allow them to be there, rather than getting hooked into my thoughts and drawn away. So yeah, I tend to use a bit of a combination of CBT and ACT, whatever I'm sort of feeling at that time, really.
So you mentioned that being in the moment and being mindful really helps. Do you think so nowadays technology is like growing? Do you think as teenagers our phones or like iPads or MacBooks or even school comes in the way of us being in the moment? And how do you think teenagers could like improve on that without just completely excluding technology or social media from their lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge thing, and I come from a generation where I didn't have a phone till I was like 13, 14, and so I sort of had that period of my life where it just wasn't a thing, and nowadays it just always is, right from like you're a baby, you're given an iPad to a screen, so it's going to have some impact on our mental health as a society, I think. And again, even though I had that period where I wasn't reliant on it, wasn't even a thing, I still feel myself being quite addicted to it. And again, noticing that when I'm feeling difficult feelings, it's easy to just scroll on my phone. I just can avoid that pain of those feelings by looking at the whatever it is on my screen. So it is tricky, and I think it does feed into that vicious cycle. It makes us feel better in the short term. It gives us a hit of dopamine. We're more likely to do it again because it relieves some of that immediate distress, but it's not a healthy coping mechanism in the long term. I do think it can be in a short term, like, you know, if you're using it mindfully and you're like, I really need a break and I just want to scroll on my phone, there's like a, you know, you could use it well there, but it's when it gets a bit chronic. Yeah, so I don't know the answers really, like to solve that. It's we can only be responsible for ourselves, I think. Setting time limits. I know on Instagram you can do like quiet mode and switch your notifications off. Have your phone in another room if you're, I don't know, doing the cooking or watching TV or something. Try and just implement those small things to try and limit as much as you can. But yeah, so it's a tough one.
So following up with that, what other like misconceptions do you have about therapy or just mental health in general?
I think a lot of a lot of people come into therapy expecting a quick fix, and it's sometimes, yeah, if there's some like with maybe a simple phobia or something, it might only take a few sessions, but often there's a lot more complexity. You know, back at the National Health Service at home, we have 6 to 12 sessions, so we have to do some work in quite a relatively short period of time. But yeah, it is hard work. You know, I've had therapy myself and I was like distraught every session. It took a lot of work and time and effort outside of sessions. So yeah, I think there's a lot of people who think therapy is like a cure-all and a bit of a fix, and it's not that, but it can be really, really useful. Another random misconception I get about therapy is a lot that therapists can like mind read somehow, or when we can't. We very much have to go by what you say, and of course we take account of body language and things like that. But yeah, it's yeah, we have to be open to be talking about it, to be able to understand what people are experiencing, and that can take time, and you can work up to that with your therapist. But yeah.
So sorry. So on a daily basis, you take in so many feelings, you take in so much information, depending on how many sessions you have in a day. How do you deal with that? Like, how do you deal with all of the other people's trauma you get? How do you like, yeah, how do you
Yeah, it's tough. It can take a lot of work. So as therapists, we all have supervisors, so that's our sort of safe space for talking through what's going on in therapy. Like I say, a lot of us therapists have therapy as well ourselves, and sometimes our jobs might come into that as well. We have colleagues who we debrief with, managers who support us, and we do all tend to do a lot of like self-development and things. I just have quite set routines so that I know that this is like my work time and this is my home time, and try and sort of separate that out as much as possible. And do all the things that I talk about, like meet my own need. If I don't meet my own needs, I know I'm not going to be able to be there for the person who's sitting in front of me or sort of on the other end of the screen. So yeah, and feeling all your feelings, because you're right, stuff does come up and stuff can be really traumatic to hear it, so that vicarious sort of trauma. So yeah, about it, we have to process that as well. Yeah.
All right, so my last question to you is, what advice can you give to our Address Teen Stress audience, or just someone out there that's struggling with their mental health?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd always start with feel your feelings, because that's a huge act thing. And obviously seeking support, there really is no shame in it, and there's lots of different things on offer now. Like you say, with social media, you can go on Instagram and TikTok and you can get a lot of free psychoeducation and tips and things. Obviously in the UK we have the National Health Service, you can access therapy there. There's lots of private therapists, but yeah, reach out. And even if you're not ready to reach out professionally to a professional, you can check out like self-help books and things like that, or just broaching it with your close friends and family is a good start. Maybe you could build up to reaching out to a professional. But yeah, I absolutely recommend therapy, obviously, but might be biased.
Okay, thank you so much for letting us interview and speaking about your experience with therapy and anything like that. I really do think everybody should go follow her Instagram at grove.mind. It's a really, really good page, very informational, and it will definitely help a lot of people out there that are struggling with anxiety, stress, whatever it might be. Do you have any final words, Betica?
No, I just think it's really super cool what you do. Thank you for helping everyone around you. And thank you for sharing all this information with us.
All right.
Thank you. Well, thank you for what you guys do as well. It's awesome. I love to see how your stuff progresses as well and what you guys get up to. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. My last request to you is if you could DM or email us some pictures of you for your post, and then tell us one like fun fact about you, just one heartwarming, silly fun fact. In the past, there's been somebody that needs to put 3 hot sauces on everything that they eat. We've somebody has a pink.
Random.
It's just something like funny about you. You can tell us.
Okay. Okay, so picture and fun fact.
Yeah. All right. It was really nice
All
meeting you. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate what you guys do as well. It's awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.